South Africa, just the name conjures up images, doesn't it? Towering mountains, vast savannas, animals you only see on TV. But South Africa is more than just a pretty picture. It's a place with a history as deep and complex as its diamond mines. And just like a diamond, South Africa has many facets. We're talking about thousands of years of stories, cultures clashing and blending. From the very first people to walk this earth to the fight for freedom, this land has seen it all. Ready to dig in? Let's go. We've got to start at the beginning, right? And for South Africa, that beginning goes way, way back. Before written words, before empires, before Instagram. We're talking about the original inhabitants, the people who called this place home for centuries upon centuries. This isn't just ancient history, though. The echoes of these early cultures still resonate in South Africa today. Their stories are in the land itself, whispered on the wind across the plains. They are stories of resilience, adaptation, and a deep connection to the natural world. It's a legacy that deserves to be heard, so buckle up because we're about to take a crash course in South African history, and trust me, it's a wild ride. Trust me, it's... Let's talk about the OG South Africans, the people who were here long before anyone else even knew this place existed. We're talking about the Khoisan, the Khoi, the San people. These guys were the original trailblazers, living in harmony with nature for thousands and thousands of years. Now, you won't find skyscrapers or Wi-Fi in their history. Their story is one of survival, of ingenuity, of adapting to a land that could be both harsh and bountiful. They were hunters, gatherers, masters of their environment. They tracked game across the savannah, knew every edible plant, and their knowledge of the stars would put any GPS to shame. Their culture was rich with stories, songs, and rituals passed down through generations. Imagine sitting around a fire, the stars blazing overhead, listening to elders share wisdom gathered over centuries. That's the kind of legacy we're talking about. The Khoisan people left their mark on South Africa in more ways than one. Their languages, with their unique clicking sounds, are unlike anything you've ever heard. Their rock art, scattered across the country, offers a glimpse into their beliefs and their world. They were the first inhabitants, and their story is an integral part of what makes South Africa so unique. Time marches on, even in ancient Africa. Around 2,000 years ago, a new group of people arrived on the scene, the Bantu-speaking communities. Now, this wasn't some hostile takeover. It was more of a slow and steady migration, a gradual blending of cultures and ways of life. These newcomers brought their own skills and traditions. They were farmers, herders, skilled in ironworking. They brought with them crops like sorghum and millet, and they introduced new ways of shaping metal into tools and weapons. This Bantu migration wasn't just about new faces arriving, it was a cultural exchange. The Bantu people learned from the Khoisan, adopting their knowledge of the land and its resources. And the Khoisan, in turn, were influenced by the Bantu's farming and metalworking skills. This blending of cultures wasn't always smooth sailing. There were conflicts, competition for resources, and power struggles. But through it all, a new South African identity began to emerge, one woven from the threads of many different traditions. It's a story of adaptation, innovation, and the merging of different ways of life. It's a reminder that South Africa's history has always been a tapestry, woven from the contributions of many different people. Hold on to your hats, folks, because things are about to get really interesting. Up until now, South Africa had been quietly existing, doing its own thing. But the winds of change were blowing in from across the sea. Enter the Europeans. For Europeans, Africa was a giant, mysterious continent waiting to be discovered. In the 15th century, the Portuguese led the charge, driven by gold, spices, and new trade routes. In 1488, Bartolomé Dias rounded the southern tip of Africa. They called it the Cape of Good Hope. The Portuguese set up trading posts along the coast, followed by the Dutch in the 17th century. They established the Dutch East India Company and built a fort. Europeans brought their languages, religions, and ideas, and they also brought the sinister slave trade. Section 5. The Lure of Riches. Word got around fast that South Africa was more than just a pretty face. Beneath the soil lay a treasure trove of riches, diamonds, and gold. And as we all know, when there's gold in the hills, people tend to lose their minds a little. The discovery of diamonds in 1867 and gold in 1886 changed everything. Towns boomed into cities, railways were built, and the world watched as this sleepy corner of Africa transformed into a global economic player. But this newfound wealth came at a steep price. The discovery of diamonds and gold ignited a scramble for resources and power. The indigenous people were pushed off their land, their way of life disrupted. And the Europeans, well, let's just say their greed knew no bounds. The competition for wealth led to tensions between the British and the Boers, descendants of the original Dutch settlers. This clash of empires erupted in the Anglo-Boer Wars, brutal conflicts that left scars on the land and its people. The discovery of diamonds and gold may have brought wealth to some, but it also sowed the seeds of division and conflict. It was a time of rapid change, but also a time of exploitation and injustice. So picture this, it's 1910, and after years of fighting and negotiating, a new country is born, the Union of South Africa. Sounds promising, right? Well, here's the catch. This union was built on a foundation of inequality, with power firmly in the hands of the white minority. The indigenous African population, the very people who had called this land home for centuries, were relegated to second-class citizens. They were denied basic rights, stripped of their land, and excluded from the political process. But the spirit of resistance was already flickering. Black South Africans, denied a voice in their own country, began to organize. In 1912, a group of visionary leaders came together to form the South African Native National Congress, which later became the African National Congress, or ANC. These early activists understood that the fight for freedom would be a long and arduous one. They faced discrimination, harassment, and imprisonment, but they refused to be silenced. They organized protests, challenged discriminatory laws in court, and kept the flame of hope alive during some of South Africa's darkest hours. The formation of the Union of South Africa might have been a victory for white supremacy, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in the struggle for equality. The fight had just begun. Section 7. Apartheid's grip. Fast forward a few decades and the situation in South Africa had gone from bad to downright horrific. In 1948, the National Party, fueled by racist ideology, came to power and implemented a system of segregation and discrimination that would become synonymous with evil: apartheid. Imagine a world where your race determined every aspect of your life, where you lived, where you worked, who you could marry, even where you were allowed to walk on the street. That was the reality for millions of black South Africans under apartheid. Schools were segregated, hospitals were segregated, even park benches were deemed whites only. Black South Africans were stripped of their citizenship, forced to carry passbooks, and subjected to constant surveillance and harassment. The ANC, along with other liberation movements like the Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC, refused to stand idly by. They organized boycotts, strikes, and acts of civil disobedience. Leaders like Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and Oliver Tambo emerged as symbols of resistance, inspiring millions with their courage and determination. The world watched in horror as the violence of apartheid escalated. The Sharpeville massacre in 1960, where police opened fire on peaceful protesters, sent shockwaves around the globe. South Africa became a pariah state, isolated by international sanctions and condemned by people of conscience everywhere. Section 8. Freedom's Dawn. For decades, the struggle against apartheid raged on. It was a David and Goliath battle, with brave activists facing down a brutal and oppressive regime. But even in the darkest of times, the hope for a free and democratic South Africa never died. Finally, after years of struggle, sacrifice, and international pressure, cracks began to appear in the edifice of apartheid. The unbanning of the ANC and other liberation movements in 1990 was a pivotal moment, and then, on February 11, 1990, the world held its breath as Nelson Mandela, after 27 long years in prison, walked free. His release was a moment of pure joy and a testament to the indomitable spirit of the human soul. Negotiations for a democratic transition began in earnest. It was a complex and delicate process, with years of mistrust and animosity to overcome. But in 1994, a miracle occurred. South Africa held its first free and fair elections. The world watched in awe as millions of black South Africans, many voting for the first time in their lives, lined up to cast their ballots. And when the results were announced, it was a landslide victory for the ANC. Nelson Mandela, the former prisoner, the symbol of resistance, became South Africa's first black president. Section 9, Building a Nation. The dawn of democracy in South Africa was met with celebrations around the world. But the hard work of building a new nation from the ashes of apartheid was just beginning. The scars of the past ran deep, and the challenges were immense. One of the most remarkable achievements of the post-apartheid era was the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC. Led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the TRC provided a platform for victims of apartheid-era atrocities to share their stories and for perpetrators to seek amnesty in exchange for confessing their crimes. The TRC was not without its critics, but it played a crucial role in acknowledging the injustices of the past and promoting healing and reconciliation. It was a testament to the power of forgiveness and a bold experiment in restorative justice. The government also embarked on ambitious programs to address the legacy of apartheid, including land reform, affirmative action, and the provision of housing, healthcare, and education to previously disadvantaged communities. While significant progress has been made, South Africa still faces many challenges. Poverty, inequality, unemployment, and crime remain persistent problems. The legacy of apartheid continues to cast a long shadow, and the dream of a truly united and prosperous South Africa remains elusive. Section 10, Looking Ahead. So here we are at the end of our whirlwind tour through South African history. It's been a journey filled with highs and lows, moments of triumph and periods of despair. But through it all, one thing remains clear: the people of South Africa are nothing short of extraordinary. They overcame centuries of colonialism, survived the brutality of apartheid, and emerged from the darkness with a spirit of forgiveness and reconciliation that continues to inspire the world. South Africa today is a country in transition, grappling with the challenges of its past while striving to build a brighter future. It's a country of contrasts, where immense wealth exists alongside grinding poverty, where modern cities share the landscape with rural villages. The road ahead will not be easy, but if there's one thing that history has taught us, it's that the human spirit is capable of overcoming even the most daunting obstacles. And in the resilience, determination, and Ubuntu spirit of its people, South Africa has reason to be hopeful. The story of South Africa is far from over. In many ways, it feels like the most important chapters are still being written.